So our special guest today is Lisa Lebel, and she is a horror book reviewer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So how did you get started in reviewing horror books?
Well, it's funny actually because it was during the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic. I went through an unexpected divorce
Yeah.
and I was super isolated because all my family, it was 1,000 miles away. So I was spending a lot of time in the Stephen King groups, and someone, from Grimoire of Horror, they reached out to the group and asked if anyone was interested in being a book reviewer.
Yeah.
So I said, that sounds like my kind of thing. So I jumped on it and I was writing for Grimoire of Horror.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Sounds good. And did you do much reviewing for them in the pandemic?
Yeah. So Richard Chizmar's book, Chasing the Boogeyman, came out, and I started with him around that time. So I was able to get an advanced review copy of that one. And it was just so exciting. But yeah, I got to review a bunch of stuff. Cemetery Dance was always sending me good stuff to review. And yeah, I'm trying to think. I think it was actually 2021 when I started with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were a little in there, but because was when Chasing the Boogeyman came out. And yeah, so I was working with them. I worked with Forgotten Fiction as well, doing book reviews for them. And I really enjoy it.
It's reviewing's quite good, isn't it? Because it takes you off into different worlds all the time, doesn't it? It's something different every single book.
Yeah, so the thing for me that was most interesting was seeing all the different writing styles, because I read a bunch of books I never would have picked up on my own, probably. And, I read a lot on Audible. I like to listen while I multitask, but these were physical books, and it just had a different feel to it. And yeah, but it was something different every time. And like, I got to learn a lot, about kind of like what carries the book through, like what makes it compelling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. So how would you approach reviewing a horror book? What elements do you normally focus on?
So for me, every book it's funny because I know we said we're doing 2 interviews, but so much of this ties itself into each other for me with how I became to be an editor, was because I was getting these arcs and seeing these mistakes in these books. And I was like, oh no, it's too late to save them. They needed me sooner. But
we can
when I'm
merge
reading,
the two.
it was really hard to just read and not be able to fix it. Like it just like, ugh. But for me, that a book is compelling and the story has to be compelling and the writing are two different things. So sometimes you have a good writer who can't tell a good story and it's a bit of a snooze fest. And
Yeah.
sometimes you have a great story and the writing is not as great, but it's more forgivable if you have that powerhouse of a story behind it.
Yeah. Well, you've dropped yourself in it now, Lisa, because I've grabbed both sets of questions and I've got
I'm sorry.
No, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
How did you become an editor?
So I started proofreading for Cemetery Dance, and I think I contacted someone who worked there and asked if they were looking for someone in like an intern capacity. I started proofreading for them, and I went on and I started my own business and Level Up Editing. And so getting those arcs, some of the horror ones especially, I don't want to name ones that had critical errors, but there was one book in particular that I was reviewing, and their intro was it name dropped 20 characters that, you had no idea who they were talking about. And the first chapter has to sell the book for me.
Yeah.
And if your little Kindle review or like take a look inside this book on Amazon, or you're reading the first chapter and it's like, what are all these names? like, you lost me. Like, I'm going over to the Barnes and Noble, I'm getting a Starbucks coffee, and I put your book back on the shelf.
Yeah.
So they name dropped all these names, but went into the book, and it was a very good book, but like some of those cringy errors, like changing narration mid-paragraph, and like I wished I could talk to the author and like that I wasn't being handed an arc that was, a month from being published, because they really needed to see someone sooner and get some advice on some of these things that would really help make their book more powerful, more sellable, and more enjoyable overall.
Yeah. So how do you approach working with authors to sort of like maintain their uniqueness in a book?
So that was the funny thing about proofreading, and I really had to learn when to curb back my edits, because I would have a tendency to just go wild on the Word document. But as I'm reading a book, and especially on longer books, I start to learn like which things are a writer's style versus which things are grammatically incorrect. So sometimes there are grammar errors, but it's in the cadence of what the author is saying. And if they continue it throughout the book, I have to go back and be like, okay, this is the way they write, I'm leaving that alone. Like, there's artistic license in there. So, and it's with each new author, there's a new experience for that, because everyone has their own style. And that is the most fun of all for me.
Yeah. I mean, like with some books that have a unique style, with the edits that you do, are you able to still sort of like talk to an author and say, look, it would be better if it was this way, versus this way, and still be able to keep their uniqueness in there?
So sometimes they'll have something and I'll be like, hey, I think it would be better if we worded it like this, or I think, and, some people are more open to suggestion than others. And, a lot of authors, their book is their baby, and they feel very strongly about certain aspects, and they're like, no, we're not changing that.
Yeah.
And, they're the boss in the end. So what they say goes. So if I have an opinion about a grammatical thing and they're like, no, or, even if it's a plot thing, and I say, I think it would be better if the story went this way, if they feel like strongly in their heart, they want the story to go their way, you have to respect that, because writing is an art, and every person is unique, and you never want to quash the uniqueness with grammatical edits and, all of that.
So what are some of the common mistakes that you see authors making in especially horror writing?
So in horror, a common problem is starting too slow, because going back to when your first chapter has to sell the book, I was proofreading one book and I said, well, if I didn't already know this was a horror, I'm 100 pages into a 250-page book and I don't actually know this is a horror.
Yeah.
The author has not given me like, why is this a horror? So that's one of the common mistakes if it's too slow in the beginning, because you want it to be compelling. So like, I want the first chapter to have a punch. If you have a slow burn kind of story, adding an intro that's powerful, or pull something from later in the book, like a scene, and really have the beginning of the book really hook the reader so they want to continue reading through. Because if you're reading it and you're like, why was this in the horror section for 100 odd pages? You lost me. And that shouldn't be happening. So that's one of the things I see more often.
It's got to pack a punch, hasn't it, really, the first chapter?
And sometimes, it's regrettable, because as you keep reading, like, yeah, it's a good story, but I sit back and think, like, if I wasn't reviewing this book, or if it wasn't a proofread or an edit, would I have continued reading it on my own? And, I ask myself that, like, what would I think of this as the reader? And that's an important question for me, when I'm reviewing a book or when I'm editing a book. Like, if I pick this up off the shelf, what am I thinking right now as the reader?
Yeah.
I tell my authors, I'm Jon Snow. I know nothing. I don't know what's going on here. And a lot of it is like raising my hand and being like, oh, I'm confused in this part. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Because the author has a vision in their head and they know what they're saying, but sometimes the audience doesn't. And that's really when you need that other set of eyes to come in and read your story just out of the blind and point out which things might not make sense early on, or if there's a lack of consistency. And, you know, and just talking typos alone, like it is impossible to read your own work. I mean, like even if I'm writing an article, I need someone to edit that because you read your own words so many times, your eyes skip over the errors because you know what you're saying.
Yeah.
And that's why everyone needs an editor.
Yeah,
So,
that's right. You can get familiar with words, can't you? Once you've written the book yourself and you're reading it that many times, doing different drafts, you get used to what you're seeing.
Absolutely, exactly. And it was even one of the books I was editing, I read it like 10 times, and even I was skipping over stuff. And sometimes, you know, I'm like, all right, I got to sleep on this a little bit and come back to it with a fresh set of eyes and not, you know, because you see something new every time, it feels like sometimes when you know you're writing. But that's when having another set of eyes looking at it really comes in.
Yeah. So how do you deal with like we're talking about extreme splatterplunk horror now. So how do you deal with reading disturbing or frightening content as a reviewer or an editor?
It's happened. I don't scare easy. And, you know, a lot of people ask me like, why horror? Like, why can't you read something nice? And I really love horror because I don't know, like, but I like my horror on the fiction shelf, like firmly. And sometimes horror, you know, it dabbles into science fiction or it just gets a little too close to reality. You know, that show Black Mirror?
Yeah.
Like, you know, Black Mirror, Paranormal Activity, The Fourth Kind. I can't sleep at night. uh, so like when it gets a little too close to reality, that's one thing. But sometimes like there are some genuinely graphic scenes in books. And I, you know, if an author can put words on page and make me like have a physical cringe, I applaud them. Like, you know, it's uncomfortable for sure, but I'm like, yay for them. That's a good job. But you know, sometimes when it's disturbing, I need to like step away for a second. And I think it's only happened to me on one occasion where something was too disturbing to read. But yeah, just taking a break. And on different projects, if I'm doing proofreading, I'm not working with the author directly. And if I'm doing reviews, I'm not working with the author directly, usually. Yeah. When I'm editing, I am working on like with the author directly. Oh, there was a scene in there's a new release coming out from Jeff Oliver and Chris McCauley, and they are doing, it's called Blood and Verse, and it is based on Dracula, and it's very, very good. There was a scene in there that had me for a second. I had to step away for a bit, but you know, like I give them gold stars. You scared the horror editor. Good work. You know, it's a good job. You know, am I feeling well? Probably not, but you know, they did a great job. That's what matters.
Have you ever refused a book or sort of like put a book down and thought, no, I'm just not going anywhere near that?
I have.
Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to name that. Don't worry.
Yeah. It just once, but yeah, it was a bit of a mess. It was a writing catastrophe. There were many disturbing scenes, and just they wanted to make their own grammatical rules. And it was one of the situations, thankfully, I wasn't working with the author. I've never been in a situation where I've worked with an author that, you know, and it hasn't worked out, where I said, like, I can't work on this book. And it was in one of those positions where it could easily go to another proofreader, and it was not a problem. But that has only happened to me once. And
yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose that wasn't a very nice
I don't like having to do that. That doesn't feel good. Like I feel like but it was a rare occasion, but it does happen. It does happen.
Yeah, I can imagine it does. Okay, so let me just have a look. See, I'm looking through two sets of questions now here for you.
I'm sorry, I pulled that out of nowhere on you. I was trying to really stay to my book reviewer questions, and I'm like, I can't say how I feel about this editing, but I got really
No, that's all right.
yeah, they all kind of mesh together for me. But the
I can
frustration
understand that.
in not being able to, and like, a lot of people say to me, like, don't you want to be writing? Like, why do you enjoy editing? And like, it seems tedious to a lot of people, like going in and adding the commas, but it's kind of like if you have OCD and you walk into someone's house and all their pictures are crooked, like that is what reading those arcs was like. And being an editor, like I'm allowed to fix all the pictures on the wall, and it makes me happy. It's deeply satisfying. Everything is right in the world. I can straighten all the pictures. Everything is as it should be.
And here's me, I can just sit on the sofa and just look at them crooked pictures.
Yeah, everyone is different, but it's one of those things. But it's definitely a lot more fun to read when I can be part of the process.
That's good. So what advice would you give to an author that was looking for an editor for their manuscript?
Well, I don't know. I'm sorry. I never quite thought of it that way. So a lot of people, they have an assumption that the publisher is going to do the editing. And a lot of publishers do have an editor, but when you're submitting, it depends. So there are people who self-publish. There are people who submit to a publisher. And but when you submit a book to a publisher, they expect that it has already been through some sort of editing process. Like you can't really just hand them a book that you just wrote, maybe your friend looked at, because there's going to be stuff in there you haven't caught. And not to say it doesn't work out for some people, but I've seen a lot of books slip through the cracks where it should have seen an editor and it could have been better. And, I want that book, from that first time author to be the best it can be. And if you're not having an editor look at it, it's not the best it can be. So what might happen is a publishing house might reject it. Or I have had a lot of authors, they trusted the publishing house to do a thorough edit, and a lot of mistakes went through. And then people were reviewing their book and being like, why are there so many mistakes in here? And the publisher let them down, and the editor that worked with the publisher let them down. And, you want your work, when it goes to publishing, to be as close to perfect as it can be. Like, even if they do have an editor on staff, I've been astonished by some of the stuff I've seen that has gone through an editor from a publisher, and it's gotten through somehow. And then, the author's upset. Like, I can't believe there's all these mistakes in my published book. What were they doing? So hiring an editor on your own as an author is really, it's taking control. Your work is going out there. It's your written word. You want it to be beautiful, and it's an investment in that. And I think a lot of people are trying to bypass it, especially with AI. And why don't you just run it through Grammarly? And it is just not the same. And, you have to trust who you're handing your book to. And especially if you're self-publishing, I would really recommend, because then, you don't even know if you don't have a proofreader looking at it. Self-publishing, that seems a little scary if you're not having an editor look at it. But yeah, it happens.
Yeah, I can definitely talk from experience through using Grammarly. Definitely with one of my books, I've been picked up in reviews on my grammar. A lot of the reviews are really good, but they all kind of like mention about the grammar needs work. So yeah, that one.
Yeah, those are like nitpicky things to me. And it's such a shame when like a book suffers because there are these grammatical errors and like, you needed me. You needed me sooner. It's my rallying cry.
Yeah, so that one's being taken off soon to be revamped. So before the sequel comes out. So yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of things out there at the minute, isn't there, to sort of like supposedly help authors. You've got Grammarly, you've got Pro Writing Aid. As you said, AI can do that as well. So do you feel like editing's going to get surpassed by these things?
Well, gosh, I hope not. But, editing, aside from just those grammatical mistakes, there's things, AI can't possibly pick up, like the tone of the author, which things are stylistic, even if they are not grammatically correct. When I work with Jeff Oliver, for instance, he does a lot of poetry and prose, and sometimes I'm Googling, words that rhyme with whatever, because, you have rhyming words every few lines.
Yeah.
And I don't think I can do that. Horror poetry is fun. And, but it's the little details, or like you're reading through, and in one of the books, I figured out who the killer was too early on. And I said, this is what made me figure it out. And they took it out of the book. And I can't wait till more people read it. And so like my major clue, they're like, no, I don't want my reader to know who the killer is that fast. They're like, damn. So, I mean, stuff like that, AI definitely can't do with your content, your plot, making sure it's compelling. AI is never going to replace that. I mean, are people going to try to get around it anyway? Absolutely, but no, it just can't replace an actual person.
No. So what do you do if you sort of like are reading a book and you notice that there's a major plot hole? How would you sort of like approach the author and tell them that?
So sometimes I'll point out a plot hole and they'll disagree. They're like, no, it's not a plot hole. And, kind of got to let some of it go, on my end. And I can get, like I said, OCD perfectionist, but they are the author, they are the boss. And, if they feel something is not necessarily a plot hole always, but like, do the facts check out? And suspension of disbelief is a big thing. Like you're reading a book, they talk about suspension of disbelief, and I really love, there was a video on it in Game of Thrones, and how in the first couple seasons, and everyone is upset at the last season, and I'm sorry, spoilers, Game of Thrones, but how many main characters stayed alive? And it's because of suspension of disbelief. And like you have people online saying, you guys are seriously arguing about what's believable when there's dragons and White Walkers killing everyone. But, when you're writing fiction, you set up a fictional world and there are rules. And some basic rules still apply, like, time and space. And if you have poor fighters on the front lines and they're all main characters and you see all the front lines get swiped down, like, how did they live? It's not probable. And I'll come up with sometimes there are suspension of disbelief issues, and I'll be like, no, I don't believe that person had time to do all those things, or like the logistics of it. And at one point I was trying to decide how long it would take to decapitate someone, and these are the things you really have to think about. I'm like, I'm not sure they would have time. And the conversations end up great. Like it's funny, especially with horror. And I'm like, but yeah, sometimes it's a suspension of disbelief. So the thing that happened with Game of Thrones was you never knew what they were going to throw at you. It was because you're reading a book and it's from the main character's point of view. You assume that person is safe. Game of Thrones was known for no one was safe. But then at one point, I think so one of the major characters, like he gets a scratch, and like, you thought he was going to be around for the whole thing, and he ends up dying of an infection. And yeah, that probably happened a lot back then.
Yeah.
But then, season 6 or 7, one of the main character gets stabbed in the belly like 5 times, and she continues running down a street and she's good. She escapes, like she like manages to duel like a 1-person duel to the death, wins, sails back to Westeros, and it was all downhill from there. I'm trying not to give spoilers on Game of Thrones or get too deep into it, but like you have a moment like that, and I'm like, I think your character is pretty dead, my friend. So there's some conversations like that. The plot holes, it's always a deep discussion, the plot, because there's a vision, and some authors are more malleable than others. Some are like, I really don't want to change anything. Like, go ahead and fix all your grammar, but this is my book. It's going to be how I want it, and that's the story. And so I can make arguments, but sometimes they're heard, sometimes they're not, and that's okay. And especially if someone's self-publishing and they have a vision for their book, that's okay. Like, they wrote this book how they want it to be, and they can do that. And but yeah, we'll get into plot, and some stuff has to be rewritten, and there's a lot of going back and forth between. So I do my first run through, second, third, fourth, fifth, and the author will take back a section, rewrite it, it'll work better, awesome, and we have like these back and forths with it, and it's really great. It's always a fun process, and I love the, like, I don't think your character is alive arguments, and like, how long would it take someone to die after they were, had an axe to the neck or something, and like, I don't think they're still talking to you on the floor, but it's fun. It's fun.
So what's the scariest book you've ever reviewed?
Ever reviewed? I thought you were going to ask me scariest book I've ever read, and I want to tell you about The Exorcist.
No, you carry on.
Oh my gosh. I do audiobooks, and I started doing this because I couldn't sleep at night, and my thoughts would get away from me. So the nice thing about an audiobook is that if the story's too exciting, it's still not going to help you sleep. If you have like a boring narrator, it's good. Some narrators are better than others for sleeping.
Okay,
And
let me stop you there. So you couldn't sleep, so you decided to read or listen to The Exorcist.
That's correct.
Okay.
It is. But what was funny is I couldn't get past the first chapter. The first chapter put me to sleep every time, and it was magic for a long time. And but William Peter Blatty himself narrates this book, and once you get to the demon voices, oh my God, talk about waking up in the middle of the night. I don't know if you can get an audio clip of that or something, but like, it's all, like, calm conversation. And then all of a sudden, there's, oh my gosh, he like has like the voice of Satan, and he's screaming, and like, you're like, oh my God, I was sleeping through this. Yeah. So I've also, another one that's not great to sleep to is It. That narrator, he's a very enthusiastic narrator, but when you stop and think about the book, and like, you're on Audible, you get 1 credit, and you could pick a 7-hour book, or you could pick a 48-hour book. And It and The Stand are each 48-hour books. And one of the characters has a stutter. One of them does voices of other characters. There's a demonic clown, and everyone's screaming, and it's really just not a pleasant sleeping experience. But scariest book I've reviewed. I think Devil's Creek by Todd Kiesling. I didn't review it, but that was one of the ones I got to proofread, and it was Oh man, that one got me. It was very, very good. It was republished by Cemetery Dance, and wow, that book, that was a stunner. That's one of the best ones I've read for scare factor.
Yeah. So what's the best indie horror books that you've read recently?
Um, so Dan Franklin has a book coming out that I'm very excited about. And I work with him. He works over at Cemetery Dance, and I work on some side projects with him. And he told me, I wanted you to read this book for me and let me know what you think. It's a submission read, and it's from a friend of mine. And I just don't want. I might be biased. I'm not sure. So I don't know who the author is. Thank God I loved this book. I can't believe he did this to me. I read this book. The book was amazing. And it was one of the ones that did get a little too real. Like, I think I had to run out and get an emergency pack of cigarettes. Like, that happened. And my boyfriend picked me up cigarettes, and he got me a lighter with a creepy clown on it. And it was a whole situation. But he didn't tell me he wrote this book until it was like 2 months ago. And it's funny because, a lot of these books I've read, I don't always follow up on, but this one stuck with me. And I was like, hey, whatever happened to that author? Did he do the rewrites? Is it getting submitted? Well, it turns out Dan Franklin wrote this book himself. He didn't tell me. And I'm like, oh my God, because there was another book he had me do a submission read for, and I was not so kind on it. I gave it a much harsher review. And I'm like, I'm glad it wasn't that one. But yeah, so he's got a book coming out in February, I believe. It is called These Things Linger. And it is one of those paranormal ones, and, goes into, I don't really know how to sum it up. It's been a while since I've read it. And I'm actually doing a reread on it now. Now that I know it's him, I needed to read it again. I even forget which scene it was in it that had me. I'm sure on the reread I will find it, but this is one to look out for sure. And that's going to be coming from Cemetery Dance in February. That was definitely a scary one.
Brilliant. So I should look out for that one.
Yeah.
So who are your top 3 authors and why?
Stephen King, of course. For so many reasons, but he really defined so much of the horror genre and some of the classic horror. Like, when you really think about it, like some of the household references and, pop culture, and like, how many people call their dog Cujo and like have never read the book. And
Yeah.
But there's that, or everyone knows who Pennywise is, or Jack Torrance from The Shining. And so much of the genre like was built like some of those classic, like Annie Wilkes and Kathy Bates in Misery, and like not even from the books themselves, but the movies. And a lot of Stephen King's, like, I found the movies first and then went back to read the books. And, I really have a rule about trying not to watch a movie until I've read the book. But, when you're in high school, you just watch movies.
Yeah.
But then I'd track down the book and I'd read it. And he definitely is the master of horror. He certainly is. And, you could just pick up anywhere with him, and it's a different story each time. And it really just wows me, like, how he can come up with all this stuff. All right. My other 2, and the top 3 is hard. It's really limiting. Favorite authors. Are we talking horror authors or authors in general?
Horror authors.
Of course. William Peter Blatty. Excellent. And Thomas Harris. I recently picked up the Hannibal Lecter series. I absolutely love it, with the exception of Hannibal Rising. I did not care for that one.
Yeah.
But I recently read the Hannibal Lecter series, and like I loved those movies. Like, 'cause I love the movies as much as I love the books, and I love reading the book. watching the movie, watching the remake, reading the book again, watching the made for TV series, like, and all the different versions of a thing. And I guess that's one of the things I love about Stephen King as well, because, there's the book, The Stand, then there's the 1990 miniseries, then they remade it recently, a couple years ago. And like, each thing has its defining factors, and they redid Pet Sematary recently. I'm loving the remakes that are kind of modernized. The new It movies were fantastic. I actually loved the new It movies better than the original, and I don't say that often, but the original was just, I love Tim Curry, but it just was cheesy to me, that movie.
Don't you feel like disappointed when some of the like details aren't the same as what are in the actual book?
I am so glad you asked me that. So there's a difference for me. Now, if a book came out last year and they're making it into a movie, yeah, I'll get mad. I'll get mad about that if they're not like being honest to the book. But you have something like I've been watching on Max, they did Interview with the Vampire, and they've got a season 1 of it. And this is a hot debate on there. Because we all know the classic story, Interview with the Vampire, Louis and Lestat, and the movie with Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the version on Max, but there was a lot of rumors, from the characters, like, were they gay? Were Louis and Lestat an actual gay couple? And for Max, on, the season 1, they just dove into it. They're like, yeah, they are gay and we're running with it. And I think that's so cool. And is it honest to the book? No, but it is a new spin on a traditional story we've heard 1,000 times, and it's refreshing, and I love it. I love it. When you have a classic like that that's remade and like a new spin on it, I really love that. And then you don't know what's going to happen.
I thought the series was quite good.
Oh, you watched it too? Good.
Yeah, I thought the series was brilliant, to be fair.
And then I had to go rewatch the movie, the original. I hate that movie, and I've been really trying to listen to the audiobook. And speaking of narrators that put me to sleep, I have not gotten past part 3. I don't know. I wake up in the morning and like the book is finishing. But I've heard that The Vampire Lestat is a much more exciting book, and I'm excited for that one. I haven't read that one yet, but I was very familiar with Interview with the Vampire, and I hadn't read the book yet. So I had to go, I found the series on Max. And sometimes this happens. You discover horror all backwards, and, you're kind of ashamed to say, I haven't read Interview with the Vampire yet. You find the series on Max, then you have to go watch the movie and read the book, and it's all backwards. But, I knew the story because it's one of those, just household references that everyone knows that story. And so I really love when they do that. When they make a change that kind of changes the vision of the book, that bugs me. Don't like The Dark Tower, the movie they made. Oh God, what a travesty that was. Or like if they just like rip the soul out of something, like if you're doing a twist on it, like you better be honoring the story, like make it badass, make it awesome, make it new. Don't rip out the core of the story. If you have a core character, these are their values, you keep them. Like, I guess that goes along with the suspension of disbelief. I think it like has to be, there's a set of rules, and the rules, can someone just sit there and define the rules? No, but them when you're watching, like, you're like, this isn't right. And, whether it's a suspension of disbelief issue, whether they're not being true to the book, the original story, it's one of those things. Bag of Bones was a book by Stephen King I really loved. That was a horrible movie. Like, don't even bother, skip the whole thing. And there's a lot like that. Yeah. But when they can do a good job and pull it off, I like that. So you had asked me about favorite authors, and I just went off.
No, that's fine. What's your third one? What's your third one?
yeah, William Peter Blatty, The Exorcist and Legion are both fantastic, and the Thomas Harris series are
Silence
incredible
of the
and
Hills.
they're horror. Yeah.
Silence of the Lambs, not the Hills. Where did they?
Do you know what I just found out yesterday? Jodie Foster was in Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
It was not her in Hannibal. It was a different actress.
I think.
Did you know that?
Yeah, I think she only did the first one, didn't she? If I remember rightly.
I didn't know it wasn't her in the second one. They made her look so similar. And you know what it was? I was Googling the Hunger Games, and like sometimes I see an actor somewhere. You're watching some random show and you're like, where do I know this person from? And it was she was the President Alma Coin in the Hunger Games. And I'm like, she looks familiar. What's she been in? And I'm like, Hannibal. Clarice Starling, excuse me? I'm like, that's Jodie Foster. I'm like, how did they pull this over on me? Like, do you know how many times I've seen that movie? I can't believe I didn't realize it was a completely different actress. They did such a good job. Oh my gosh. But yeah, that was fun. I just found that out yesterday, as a matter of fact. But the book Hannibal had a wild turn at the end that I don't know. Does it count as a spoiler if the book came out 40 years ago?
No.
Have you read the Hannibal Lecter series?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what did you think about the end of Hannibal? I have to know.
I'll be honest, I can't remember.
God, okay, so Clarice ran away with Hannibal in the book at the end. And they like went off to France together and we're dancing at the opera. And I can't function with this information. I don't know, it goes against everything I know from the movies, because this was one of the ones I knew the movies backwards, forwards, and wasn't even aware they were books until the last couple years. And I read the books and I'm like, excuse me, Clarice Starling, Jodie Foster would never. Because she's such this high moral character in the movies and in the book. I mean, yeah, he totally tortured her and hypnotized her and whatever and used dirty tricks. But still, I'm like, I don't know how to go on with this information. This changes everything. Yeah, it was wild.
So you really don't like changes then from the book?
I think, so you know what? I don't know, I feel like the book betrayed the character in this instant. It's funny because you write a character for 2 books and the character has these moral values and you're like, that does not sit right with me. And, one of the rare occasions where, I think the movie ended it better than the book. Not that the book didn't wow me and impress me, but I don't think Clarice.
So as an editor, you would have suggested to the author to actually...
Right. I would have been like, excuse me, Mr. Harris, I don't think Clarice would do this. And he would have been like, listen, shut your mouth, lady. Could you imagine being like Stephen King's editor and trying to tell him no on something? I can't. Oh my gosh. But someone is Stephen King's editor. Someone is. There's a person out there, telling Stephen King no.
Yeah.
It kind of have to be the killjoy sometimes, but it happens.
It does. It really does. So is there anything else you'd like to add, Lisa?
Cool.
I feel like I went on a tangent for most. I'm so sorry.
No, it's not right.
It was lovely chatting with you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's been wonderful having you on the show.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Coming on.
Okay.